Hey, Jerry.
Hey,
It's been a while.
it has been a while.
Word on the street was that you quit this game.
I did for a little bit.
Does this mean you're back?
I'm back. Welcome to episode 271 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kellett.
Jerry, it is awesome to be here and to see you again, my friend.
It is awesome to be seen and awesome to see you as well.
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes of your CISO career, you're back.
I'm not sure that there's any rising going on. It's all ashes.
I think the Bible has something to say about that. But hey, here we are.
But we're back. We're back, baby.
Awesome. Do we want to tell the three of you will still have the feed up what happened?
Yeah, I think you all may have recognized that we radically slowed down the frequency with which we released episodes. And that was in large measure due to me taking a new job. Back in early 2020, I took a job as the CISO for IBM Cloud. And that was exciting, though extraordinarily demanding and intense job. And so I was there up until last Friday. And now I am as they say in sports land, I am a free agent.
Spending more time with family sort of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly why I left. Yes. To spend more time with family.
None of the allegations were proven accurate. All of those. No guilt was proven or admitted in any situation involved, as I recall.
None of the witnesses made it to trial.
Sometimes that's just how it works out. I don't know. But I, for one, am very happy that we have some more time to do this now. And like you, my life got busy. We had a big pause in 2019 because my body decided to try to kill itself. And I was laid up for about a year, but I got better, they say, and I'm all good now. And then you took a crazy job. And then between that, we really haven't had much time, but here we are. And so what do you think? Is this going to be a regular thing, or is this just a once a decade frequency sort of thing now?
So I definitely want to do this on the regular. I actually enjoy this. This was something that I really look forward to. And it was sad that I stopped. It was a good outlet. It was nice to connect with people, fun to record, and fun to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to get back into it.
That's great. Ditto, by the way. And I hope some of the folks from the old days are still out there. And if not, maybe we'll pick up some new interesting folks who are curious about what we have to say, and we can be of some help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unlike normal, we typically have a slate of news stories that we talk about. This one's going to be a little bit different. I wanted to do a little bit of reflection, maybe between you and I, on what perhaps we've learned over the past 7-8 years before the show slowed down. We really talked a lot about the things we can learn from recent news stories, but I think we probably both have learned some pretty important lessons ourselves. And I think in some ways has put context around the things that we had talked about previously, at least for me.
Yeah, you had a huge real world environment to deal with countless unending threats and incidents and scenarios, and a massive MBA session, if you will, in real world security. And I'm sure, obviously, we both have ethics to consider and confidentiality to consider, so we got to be a little careful there. But like you, I've moved jobs a few times. Currently, I'm working and have for the last 3 years as director of information security engineering and application security for a late stage startup called SalesLoft. It's a SaaS tool that helps salespeople. It's all cloud-based, and I had a great team working for me and worked with some good guys, but it's one thing to talk about things. It's another thing to do it in the real world. And I think we have a lot of lessons learned of how tough it can be to take a great idea and execute it in reality.
Yeah, that I think has been my biggest observation, is that it's pretty simple to talk about security topics in the abstract and how to better defend yourself and whatnot. But putting that into practice, I found to be extraordinarily difficult, because it's as much of a political problem. Security is as much of a political and people problem as it is a technical problem. So I don't think there's anybody that would say they're like overly surprised by that statement, but I really felt that deeply.
Yeah, I think in my career, I started off as very technically talented, but not very socially competent. And I think I was fortunate to have a time in the InfoSec and security and IT industries where you could get away with being the brilliant jerk. And I was for a long time. But as I've gotten more mature, and I like to think smarter and wiser, and have gotten, less ego driven and been able to learn to work better with other people, which I'm still working on every day. It is amazing how much that matters from a standpoint of trying to further your goals in an organization. And that's one thing I see all the time, that we feel like black and white solutions are out there and that everything is just an obvious thing that just needs to be done, and people who don't see it are dumb or working against us. It's not true. They have a different subject matter expertise, and they have a different priority, and they have a different set of goals and criteria that they care about. And often security is adding friction to what they're trying to achieve, and it's in the abstract. So it's one thing I learned in this current role, which I'm still at and hope to be at for a while, is building trust, which sounds super cheesy, has been incredibly helpful, and being reasonable and flexible and not dogmatic and not militant in what I'm trying to get done. That I've been able to, I hope, build better relationships, which helps in times of crisis, especially when.
So does that help you? Sorry to interrupt, but does that help you, like when you say no, they understand that you're not just flippantly saying no, you're like, there's a well-rounded reason, you've established that level of trust, that they know that when you say something, it's for a good reason. Is that how it manifests?
In part, or if we're asking for something to be changed or a control to be added, or asking someone to reprioritize. Something recently came up that was a supply chain attack on a well-known package. And we had to ring the bell on that and trump a lot of people's other day-to-day activities to deal with that. And we do that rarely. And that establishes credibility, I think, that we only do it when we absolutely need to. And so over time, those other teams and those other leaders, when we come to them and say, hey, we've got a potential incident here and we need X, Y, and Z, they're responsive, because we're not, in their mind, crying wolf. We are only doing that when we absolutely need to do it. Or, hey, we want to put this control in place and we want to do this, or we want you to fix this vulnerability by X amount of days. And being willing to have that conversation about their priorities and what they've got going on and why this matters, and just overall trying to be reasonable about the security controls. Now, to be fair, this is also in a non-regulatory environment that doesn't have laws or the force of law with the regulatory demand that's forcing certain things. So we can be a little more flexible in the environment I'm in, where a lot of places you're at or what you were doing, there are very clear guidelines that have the force of law, and people could get seriously fined or go to jail if this isn't followed. So those are also things too, that we need to not burn our capital on the stuff that isn't that important. So it's an odd way to say it, but you've got a mandate from leadership, but that mandate doesn't mean that people will want to work with you. And I know I just completely hijacked this topic that I don't even know this is what you wanted to go down, but
No, it's exactly what I wanted to go down.
the other thing that I would say is Everything takes twice as long to get done in the real world than you think it will. And everything that you think is, it's easy, you just do XYZ. It's never you just do XYZ. And that's one thing that I have some years on me at this point, and I do a little better job of estimating from a lot of scars from previous attempts at how long things will take. And I think you've got to account for that murky factor of things that you're not expecting to go sideways, going sideways, and have a plan, have an A, B, and C plan, and give yourself wiggle room. One thing that I'm at a high performing, fast acting, get things done, move fast, break things kind of company. And there's a lot of times I've been trying to nudge the culture a little more towards, let's be a little more thoughtful, let's be a little bit slower, let's be a little more methodical, and we'll have a better outcome.
So you don't have 10x engineers, you have 11x engineers, don't you?
Try not to put a number on it because then they get sandbagged down to that number.
Well played.
The other thing I would say is budget absolutely plays a part. And there are things that everything costs money and everything costs time, people, time, whatever it is. So knowing your best bang for the buck and not chasing the edge cases and not letting the perfect solution be the enemy of good enough is another area that I've spent a lot of time trying to get right and get that balance right of, are we better off than we were before? Can we sustain what we put in place with some level of mastery and some level of competence? Then we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. Is it a perfect solve? No. Can people find ways to get around this if they really wanted to? Yes, but doesn't move the bar the way we need it to move. Is it better than what we had? And is it building a foundation we can grow off of? Then that's not a bad thing. What about you? You've had far higher level exposure and a lot bigger job than I've had the last couple of years. What are some of your big lessons learned or takeaways?
I've been thinking a lot about where to start. And you hit on something that was very interesting about laws and regulations. And certainly where I was at, there are a lot of regulations that apply globally. There's industry regulations. So for example, you might be a critical service provider for the financial or for the banking industry. And so you may fall under banking regulations. You may also in another country qualify as critical infrastructure. And so then that country's critical infrastructure laws come into play and on. And these are all have the force of law. They can either fine you, typically they won't throw you in jail, although we are starting to see a little bit of that here in the US with some SEC related matters. Although I guess it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out with the Chevron doctrine being overturned. That's a whole other discussion.
There's a non-political show, Jerry.
A whole other discussion. All I'm saying there is hold on to your butts.
I actually pretty much expect you to go to jail. I lost that.
You're surprised I'm still here, huh?
I'm happy-ish. It was a big bet paying that bookie off for a while.
Put it all on prison. All right. So an interesting thing happens, especially in a industry or in a business where you are a high profile service provider. You not only have these regulations and laws that are at varying levels of prescription, you also have to attempt to show your customers that you're trustworthy. And that especially when you're a cloud provider, you can't have every customer coming out and auditing you. That just isn't a very scalable thing. And so you end up collecting all of these industry attestations like SOC 123 and ISOs and the many other high trust and whatnot. And the interesting thing that comes along with that is what I'll call the tension between compliance and security.
Sure.
Because each of these programs have their own set of requirements. And in some instances, they are quite pedantic. They're not risk-based. They're just they're pedantic, and that can have the effect of absorbing a lot of the organizational ability for implementing and adopting new security controls and new security processes, though they might not be the most impactful things. And so there's this tension between doing what lowers the risk the most, the fastest, and most economically, versus the need to meet some compliance mandate so that you can woo new customers. Now certainly they're tangentially related, and what I found worked best, I'm not going to say that I was like a master at it, trying to find opportunities to take those compliance mandates and use them in furtherance of actually improving security. There's I think a bit of an art form there, but in some instances, there's just not a good fit. One of my observations is that a lot of the regulations, even those that are applicable to cloud providers, are really not contemplating the kinds of things that you need to do to secure yourself from modern threats. And you, as a business, you need to be off investing in novel things to address these emerging threats. But meanwhile, you've got people still wanting you to show that you have DLP, for example.
So the threat has evolved past it, but your resources are getting chewed up fighting the last war. And once the regulators put that requirement in place, they are loath to ever take it out.
Exactly.
I would riff off that a little bit too and say that having worked at a credit card focused financial in the past, PCI was of course the bread and butter there. And you could get anything done if it was under the guise of it must be done for PCI, but you couldn't get folks to go an inch past it. That was their benchmark. And it was a double-edged sword, right? You had a lot of buy-in and cooperation to reach that PCI benchmark, but now that became your limiting factor in terms of going beyond it to address new and different threats that are emerging far faster than I think the regulatory bodies can keep up with.
Right. Yeah. The management team wants to know, why do we need to spend this X millions of dollars or what have you on this new thing? Nobody's asking for it. Why do we need it?
And this is always the challenge we've had, is proving the ROI of security tooling or security, whatever it is, not tooling, security stuff, of how do you prove the breaches you avoided? How do you prove the security you improved to avoid a bad outcome?
Yeah.
And that has always been a problem.
Yes. How many planes did the TSA save? It's a very difficult number to count. You can estimate. So that was an interesting challenge. And that kind of dovetailed into, you talked about the budget woes. There is only so much money to go around. Now, I will say my former employer they took security very seriously, and in most instances put their money where their mouth was. So it wasn't, I think I was quite fortunate in some instances because like security was part of the brand they were selling. And so there was a lot of interest in making sure that we were secure. Having said that, like, never always perfect, but it was good. Another thing that I noticed, by the way, and I think this is probably an artifact of larger, older organizations, is the importance of standardization. And I don't mean that in necessarily a security context.
Standardization. So not everybody has their own bespoke Linux build on everybody's individual server.
Yeah. One of the challenges that can arise, especially in an organization that wants to move fast, is the tendency to allow what I'll call, entrepreneurship in terms of designing and building services and whatnot. The challenge is, you can gain a lot of speed by doing that. But one of the downsides that you will run into is when you want to do something new, when you need to make some material change, you end up not having to do it once. You have to do it once for each different platform that you've allowed to creep into your environment. And that is a challenge. And most of the different technologies have their own instrumentation management platforms. And so you get into this spot where you've stretched yourself very thin, and it can be difficult to do something that seems like it should be fast and easy.
Is that also tying to tech debt and old stuff that isn't taken out of the environment and retired, or?
Yeah, I definitely think so. But I think there's also I think there's also a pattern where you can be, for lack of a better word, real time accruing new tech debt.
Right. Because everything that's different takes that much more energy and mind's share to manage and process differently than what you have before.
Exactly.
But isn't that sort of at odds with innovation?
It is. I suspect we probably talked about it on this show, but it's been a long time. I once remember hearing this story about the piano and how there was an opportunity to build an instrument that more or less had an infinitely variable set of tones and pitches. The designers of the piano chose to have 88 keys and some pedals and whatnot. And one of the assertions is that that limiting factor actually allowed for, innovation, like significant innovation from the music perspective, right? So the assertion was that if a composer and a pianist had, and I said it right, but I point that out, had an infinitely variable keyboard, as it were, it would be more difficult to write music. And so I think so the answer to your question is certainly yes, it can. But on the other end of the spectrum, allowing non-standardization ends up becoming a drag on the system, which then takes away from your ability to invest in new innovation. If you look at it in a microcosm and say, for this specific service or offering or product or what have you, if you try to apply some rigorous set of standards, yeah, it's gonna take longer. The developers are not gonna like it. But in aggregate, I think you end up spending a lot less money, a lot less resources managing things that you can then apply to new products. And then also when you want to go and get into some new market that requires some new security controls, it's more manageable to do because now you have a much smaller number of platforms to change. So that was an observation that I made that I didn't really have at the top of my mind going into it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It has a lot of implications. Like I could spin down that rabbit hole for a bit in terms of how do you manage it? If you need to iterate to a new standard, do you bring everything with you? And does that mean that the benefit of whatever it is you want to go to the new standard has got to be substantial enough to justify the disruption and cost? And again, does that slow down your innovation, or is it just constrain folks to, hey, here's the set of tools to work with. You can build a lot with these tools.
It's one of those things that is much easier to avoid than it is to fix.
Yeah,
for sure. The best advice I can give is to create some enablement around adopting standards, standardized whatevers, and then draw a line in the sand, and then obviously support those businesses when they go and complain for additional money.
And then what about iterating those standards, or how often would you change them?
I think that they have to be written a little bit so that they're somewhat enduring. So if you think about like down at the operating system level, you have to be thinking about it more as N-1, N-2, N-Y. For others, I don't have a good answer other than it has to keep pace. So as an example, when you're a cloud provider, like API keys are everything. And so you've got to stay on top of the latest trends on how best to manage those. But in other instances, like multi-factor authentication, there's not a lot of new stuff happening there.
Yeah, makes sense. Boy, that's an interesting challenge though. but I can see the value. That's one thing I try to have is don't have a ton of tools in the environment that we don't understand and don't know. Have mastery over the tools we have. And the more tools and the more different tools and the more different environments, the harder that is, and the less somebody knows when something's weird or out of normal range because they don't know what normal is because everything's different all the time.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. You stretch yourself thin, right? To some extent, it's a zero-sum game. And so, you support all those various tools at the business's detriment.
So it's almost like the context switching cost in a multitasking situation of
Mm-hmm.
your brain has a switch. Okay, I'm supporting this. Now, okay, what's different than this? And this is weirder. And this is a bit nuanced. And yeah, makes sense. Yeah, but I can see how that would be a tough argument because that's such a long-term view that is not intuitive, I think, to a lot of executives.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of strong leadership, I guess is what I'll say.
So blackmail material is what I mean.
Strong leadership, blackmail, the line is very
Results oriented. As long as the results are achieved. That's fair.
That's right. I'm pretty sure I read that in a management book somewhere.
So what other key lessons do you think he came up with?
One thing that we used to talk a lot about was the importance of, I'll just paraphrase it, and saying that IT people and to some extent security people need to have a bit of an adversarial mindset. In the past, I worked on many security incidents and I got to see a lot.
You caused them?
Not that anybody can prove.
Sure.
You
were involved with.
Yes. They happened in my proximity.
That's fair. Sorry, back to your point, sir.
So my observation was in the aftermath of those, and to some extent since, is people don't really realize, and by people, smart IT people, don't realize how things can go wrong. And I think in many instances, it's due to a lack of creativity. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. If you're a IT architect designing some system, your challenge is to build the system that works. The challenge is you don't necessarily know how the thing you're building can fail. And I found it extraordinarily important. And again, the business was super supportive in this, to have a strong component around pen testing and trying to infuse that thought process, not just in the security function, but even more broadly across the organization. Because again, I know it's a trope, right? Security starts with the people. And
yeah,
when you've got people developing things, like you have an opportunity for people to design it securely versus insecurely, and you really want them to hopefully get off on the right foot. So I found that to be very, very important, very helpful, and I think it reduced some of the churn later in the process. So that was good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My only sort of thought on that is occasionally I'll get into situations where you've got a developer or IT person, whatever, asking security to prove how something could be exploited.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting question, but I think it puts security folks in a rough spot because it's basically saying that the security team or whatnot needs to know everything the bad guys could know. They got to be as creative as any bad guy to prove to whomever they're working with that this exploit could happen, as opposed to learning best practice patterns that we know avoid possible yet unprovable.
That is one of the benefits of having what I would consider to be world-renowned pen testers on my staff, which I know that not everybody has that luxury. And so you're, to that point, I think you're spot on. I think broadly speaking, pen testing is a very vital part of a responsible security program, though I recognize not everybody can afford it. In instances like that, my takeaway would be, like if you're gonna if you're gonna go to bat like that, then we'll see when we do our annual pen test, we'll see what it comes back with. But beyond that, it can be an exhausting fight, which leads me to my next observation, which is actually burnout.
Yeah. It's real.
Yeah. And so look, when you've got an organization, especially a technology organization, and I think it's not different than what you said. Like you've got the entire organization believes they know how to do your job better than you. Generally speaking, they may not admit it. They may not say it in those words, but when push comes to shove, they're smart people. And so they have a particular view on things. And I think that view is also typically colored by what their business priorities are.
Yeah. What are their incentives? What are they judged on? What are they being asked to do?
Yes. And so it's that constant, I struggled with burnout, felt like almost since the start. And by the way, it's not necessarily a reflection of the business or the job. It's really more, I think, of a reflection of my ability to cope and to I don't want to say behave, but to manage things in a way that would have avoided burnout. But I definitely felt it. And it's not pretty. I think it's very common in the industry, by the way. And I suspect that at some point in the future, and I don't mean in any way to downplay people who have actual PTSD from actual traumatic events, but I suspect in the future we're going to find some kind of variant of PTSD for some segment of technology workers.
Yeah, I'll admit that I am fighting burnout myself right now. And I don't blame the job. I don't blame, like, it's not a toxic place and the people I work with are great. It's just, I'm finding it harder and harder to disconnect and recharge and have the same level of energy. And it takes more discipline to do the job when before it was a little more effortless. It was a little more, feel that I'm fighting burnout when everything that is normally was either fine or even enjoyable is now a bit of a slog to get through. And I don't think that's a reflection on the tasks. I think it's a reflection on me. And to your point, yeah, there may be better techniques I could learn or ways I could cope better or manage that stress better. And then I also wonder if maybe there's only just so much time that a certain type of person, if I take myself as an example, can do a certain job before you start to burn out and it's somewhat unavoidable and you've got to take a break or do something different. I don't know.
I don't mean that my job or your job or any CISO's job is among the most stressful there are. There was a recent study about the top stressful jobs, and I don't think we made the top 10.
No,
but
it's an individual thing, though.
It is an individual thing, and my personality is my personality. And so I can read books all day long about how to be more resilient, and I can do all those things, and they marginally helped. And by the way, I did that. I went to therapy. I read the books, and it did help. But at the end of the day, I think there may be a compatibility problem, or maybe it's just the demands of that job and the capabilities of my part are just not congruent. They don't line up.
Yeah. Do you think it is that simple that certain people will be more successful than others? Or is it a time and seat problem? Or is it the demands of technology are moving so fast that most people will run into this problem after a period of time?
Oh, that's a really good question. Things that I had, so I do want to stop and say the business I was in was amazing. The people I worked with were amazing. The team I led, I think, was among the best in the world. Like, they are phenomenal. And so one of the things that happened, I left last week. And so last week was an emotional thing for me. I had been with IBM for 18 years, and I was with other companies that had been acquired by the same company for 7 years before that. So 25 years all total. And so I had lots of friends. And one of the interesting things that I heard as people were doing their normal, giving the speech thing, was how technical I was. And that led me to start thinking, like, maybe that's a problem. Because I hear a lot of IT people or security people complain about how their CISO is not technical. And maybe technicality or the tech level of technical prowess is not the right barometer, but I think maybe it's more not getting too far into the details is where I went wrong.
So if you're less technical, you're forced by default to abstract further from the details.
Yes. That's a very short way of saying what I took 2 minutes to say.
I'm just reflecting back to what I heard. So it was your idea. I'm just trying to be a good co-host. And
you nailed it. That was perfect.
I think it's true. I think there's a benefit and a cost. And I think, like we were talking about, everything has budget. And I think if your brain is highly technical, that uses up budget from other skills and other capabilities. And it could be how we default. And one thing I've seen over and over in my career is that we take technical people and we promote them into leadership roles without preparing them in any way for the different skill set that requires. Like, you're good at managing the firewall, go be the firewall manager. That's a whole different thing.
You didn't do great at that. How about managing the whole department?
And this is a whole nother huge topic we could unravel, but I don't know. I think burnout's a really tough problem, and I think it's very individual. And I sometimes wonder if once you get to a certain level, things are moving so much that you almost have to not care as much as you used to, or you drive yourself insane.
I think so. I absolutely think so. And throughout my career, I look back at a lot of the executives that were either peers or above me. And I've often thought about how it feels like many of them are somewhere on the sociopath scale. And I'm not sure that they are actually sociopaths as much as they've developed coping mechanisms that give that appearance.
And it's a good thing they're not doing reviews any longer.
I was, of course, not talking about any of my current or former, I guess they're all former. I had really great leadership that was super supportive. I think I was probably in one of the most unique spots ever, at least that I know of, where security was such a core component, which, by the way, is a good and a bad thing, because on the plus side, the whole business spins on that axis and they take it very seriously. But on the other hand, you have this panopticon of eyes staring at you from everywhere.
Yep. It's a tough gig.
It was an interesting challenge, and I wish them well. I think they're a great bunch of people, and it's an interesting time, by the way, for cloud providers generally, starting to see some, I don't say backlash, but you're starting to see some people or companies starting to see the polish wearing off on cloud. And so I think we're going to see more of that, and cloud will find its niche in the market. And I don't know, obviously I have opinions on what that will look like, but in aggregate, I don't know exactly where it's going to land. Certainly we're still in that heyday right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And obviously, as soon as we start to get one thing figured out, something like AI shows up and is highly disruptive.
Oh my God, AI. Yes.
And everybody and their brother who sells you anything has got to now include AI in it, whether you want it or not. And it is one of the most impressive, rapid shifts in a market that I've seen in my career. And I don't know if it's real or if we are soon to enter the trough of disillusionment, as the Gartner Hype Cycle would have us believe. And
this is, by the way, this is something that is really often debated, especially like on Mastodon or the Fediverse, right? There's a lot of poo-pooing of AI. And I think you're starting to see some of the industry analysts talking about how AI may not be able to meet its pretty high expectations. And I think that's probably, if you contrast it with some of the other bubbles like blockchain, I see a lot of people comparing AI to blockchain, and I think that's the wrong thing. Like blockchain was always going to be a yawner, right? It just happened to be at the right place at the right time to get a bunch of hype around it. But I think if you look at AI, like there's a lot of actual productive,
Yep.
and a lot. I don't mean like here and there, a lot of productive use of AI. I think where what is going to fall apart is this notion that everything has to have AI in it. I think that's the thing that's going to probably fall by the wayside.
And I think the term will get so diluted. Not all AI is equal.
Correct.
You know, we have countless different models that are meant to do different things. And so just saying you have AI could be, you've got a bunch of if-then scripts. I don't know. That doesn't mean much to me. What AI, I think we're going to find effective AIs for effective techniques. The other thing I would say is this feels much more like a very fast version of the migration of businesses to the web in the late 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say cloud, but I think that's probably a better analogy.
I think, yeah, because it feels like every single vendor is now, if there's some sort of IT or security vendor, is now having to include it. It's wild. I'll tell you, the other thing is, much like the gold rush, the people who got rich off the gold rush are not the gold miners. They're the ones selling the shovels, and we're seeing that right now too.
Yeah, NVIDIA.
Oh, it's insane.
Has that shovel factory going overdrive.
Oh, that is crazy. Let me ask you this, and I don't know how many more key lessons you have, but one question I did want to ask was, if you could go back and tell your earlier self something or a couple of some things before you started this CISO gig, what would you tell yourself? Don't is not an answer.
No, I actually, look, I'm happy that I took the job. I'm happy that it happened. I'm happy that I got to meet all the people. I'm happy with the things that I accomplished. I'm not happy about the things I didn't accomplish, but I think it would be to delegate more. Number one. I think it would be to not get into the details. And maybe that's a flavor of delegation. Look, I led a team of approximately 200 direct people and hundreds more. It's a big operation, right? With lots of moving parts. And I think I let myself get sucked into the machine. I got sucked into the engine, as it were. And so I think my comments to my former self would be to not let that happen. And I don't know how. It's another one of those things. It's yet again easy to sit here and say, but I actually don't know exactly how. Knowing myself, like I don't know how I would do that.
Your attention to detail and technical skills are what got you there. So naturally, you feel comfortable continuing in that same technique because
Right.
that's what has led to your success to that point.
Right. Yes. Let's see. What else did I have on my list here? Oh, so some more little couple layers down deeper. An observation I have is, holy God, is the firewall market a disaster?
You might have to expand on that a tad.
So I know that we haven't been here to talk about it, but there has been an absolute express freight train of amazingly bad security vulnerabilities in
Wow.
firewalls.
Yeah.
You know, and it's befalling almost all of them. I can't think of a big name that hasn't had, like even Check Point made the hit parade in the past couple of weeks. They hadn't somehow evaded it, but Palo Alto and Citrix and F5, that they've all been just brutalized. And I think, by the way, the consumers of them take it a step further and often shoot themselves in the foot by putting, a lot of the times, not exclusively, but a lot of the times these vulnerabilities exist in the management interface.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, why is the management interface on the internet?
Because it's easier.
Because it's easy. And there was one vendor, by the way, that in their default, like their low tier consumption model, the default was that it was exposed to the internet. But it wasn't until you bought their primo tier service or package that it was behind the firewall.
That is a source of much consternation with many vendors right now, that many people feel that important security tooling or logging or visibility or control shouldn't be behind a more expensive tier of the service or product you're buying. And we have heard a whole lot of that lately, including Microsoft's massive O365 breach and how complicated that was because of the key logs and indicators of compromise and whatnot were not available to every customer because of the tier of the service they bought. I'm massively oversimplifying that, I know, but it's a rough one. But I'd also say that I almost want to point a little bit of blame at the cloud providers who have built this concept of internet facing first for a lot of folks who are learning IT for the first time in a cloud environment. The concept of a secured data center behind a firewall is an old concept now. And so we've heard this phrase that the perimeter is disappearing and everything is their attack surface. And I think that sounds great on the top of a research paper or a marketing slick, but it's not 100% true. If you can get something off the internet, you dramatically reduce your common attack surface that the random scanner coming from China is going to hit. They've got to work a lot harder for it. But I do think we've lost that concept of, I know we're old, we're ancient, I get that. But in the early days, exposing something to the internet was a big freaking deal. And now it's not. Now it's just common every day, no big deal. And that's folly, if you ask me. Now, certainly, some of these are remote access, some of these are firewalls. So they're meant to be exposed to the internet, so you can't really avoid that. But to your point on the management side or the management plane, yeah, come on. Why are you trusting that interface is always going to be so rock solid?
I think there's this assumption that it's a product from a security company, therefore it's secure. And I think we both know. I think we both know from personal experience that's almost like exactly opposite. So
I have all my NDAs expired. Can I tell these stories yet? I would not trust that. It's that idea.
It's wrong-headed.
And to be fair, like, they're doing the best they can with the resources, constraints, everything else they're dealing with, all their different externalities and factors that are applying. And nobody's meaning to be malicious or dumb or bad at it. This is a full contact sport, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we've seen in many instances, the VPN listener actually being exploitable. So it's not exclusively these management consoles, but they are a common problem. And if you got those, get them off the internet, save yourself some pain for sure.
Maybe on a show coming up, we can dig deeper into this, because then it's the whole, okay, you've been exploited. Do you brick that piece of hardware? Can you ever trust it again?
So there was an interesting case a couple of months ago with, I think it was Palo Alto. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Palo Alto, where they published a 0 day, or that was a 0 day, right? They published a fix for a vulnerability. And then it came out that it had been exploited. And they said, if you have this particular setting turned on, then you're not vulnerable and it's okay. And then a couple of days later, they came back and said, we were wrong. That setting wasn't enough to protect you. And by the way, it is being actively exploited, but here's what you want to, here's the thing that you need to do. And I think they did that like 3 or 4 times. They retracted what they previously said was keeping you safe. And then they were also at some point saying, this is what you need to do if your system had been compromised. Here's how to clean it. And then eventually, I think they got to the point where I don't know that you can actually fix it yourself. And
some of that is fog of war, right? Some of that is just competent investigations. I don't want to throw too many stones. I live in a glass house, but it's a tough situation.
No, I think it's not, it didn't mean that as a pile on to Palo Alto, just that this is it's a challenging landscape, because at the end of the day, something for us as IT people to have a functioning environment, something almost certainly has to touch the internet, and that is typically our firewall.
We can't have risk zero, right? We have to do business, and that's going to have risk involved. We forgot our disclaimer, by the way, at least I did, that all these thoughts and opinions do not reflect our employers. You're an unemployed bum.
So do not reflect my previous or future employee.
I'll put that at the top of the show, good for it again. I'm being very careful not to say anything that is confidential about my current employer, as I would with any employer and previous employers, because I think that's just not very professional. But we try to take some abstractions from these roles and talk to them. So I'm always trying to walk that careful balance between giving valuable, useful information without disclosing confidential information that I'm not supposed to disclose. So all that being said, one of the things that I think is important is having a good bench and skill set to be able to react to vulnerabilities in your product when they're disclosed.
Yes.
And
yes.
Because it will happen. There is no vulnerability-free way of doing this. Sorry to report. And there may be a ton of things you can't control. You may have thousands of third-party dependencies that you have no control over, that you have. Nobody hand codes everything from scratch. You can do your best to audit, and we've got an OpenSSH vulnerability out right now that is a remote code exploit against the SSH listener that is open to the internet. There's some caveats there that make it a little harder, and it's probably not easily exploitable to most people, but that's a really scary big library that most people are using, including in their tool, with a full RCE for root on a port that's meant to be open to the internet. Sure, there are ways, in this case, you could probably figure out if a vendor had done XYZ, they would have run it more securely in this. But the concept stands that these things are going to happen. And it's more, how do you deal with them quickly and rapidly and with credibility when they do it?
100%. And I would also say I think it's about attack surface reduction. And OpenSSL, or OpenSSH, I should say, is often exposed to the internet. I won't even venture how many millions of endpoints have that exposed. Like, not every server in your environment needs to have its OpenSSH port exposed to the internet.
It's true. RDP is much better choice.
VNC, or hey, let's just go full TeamViewer.
Sure. Look, the good news is you're going to have a lot of undocumented admins helping you run your stuff.
That's true. And think of all those extra backups you'll have.
Oh, I feel like we're going long. What any other key lessons that we want to throw into this episode?
I would sum up the last 4 years as security is hard. It's not for the weak of heart. I can definitely say that. It's been an amazing experience. I'm like super happy that it happened. But I'm ready for a break now, and then I'll get back on the horse.
That's fair. Do you know what you're doing next?
I don't know. I would like to do some sort of, something more independent. Obviously, if the offer is right, currently unemployed, there's no money rolling into my bank account right now. So I'll be entertaining whatever, but it'll have to be, I'm going to be more selective about what I do next. I'm hoping to find something that allows me to spend more time on more personal hobbies like podcasting and running infosec.exchange and all its friends and photography and that sort of thing. My family.
I think you've certainly earned it.
Yes, thank you. And I think we'll cut it here. So I'm going to say thank you to all of the listeners who still have us in your RSS feed. It would be interesting to see how many people. I don't think we're going to make a lot of hay about this. I'm curious to see how many people notice. But
Well,
you can.
I'm pretty sure there's a few mental wards that still have us, a
I think-
few CIA black sites that are probably using us for punishment.
Gitmo is probably looking for some new material. They're probably getting tired of the same old
Sure.
episodes.
It's true. But hey, if you like us and you used to like us, tell your friends.
That's right.
We would love to get our listener base back. We're still planning to be completely sponsor free. We're still planning to be completely independent with nobody influencing our editorials and giving you our raw, unvarnished truth for whatever it's worth and probably exactly what you pay for it.
That's right. Definitely appreciate you. Hope this was in some way useful to you. It was certainly cathartic for me. And I think we'll be on a more normal format next time.
Excellent.
So with that, we'll talk again next time. In the meantime, you can follow Mr. Kellett where?
I am on X/Twitter at Lurg, L-E-R-G, and on Mastodon on Jerry's fine server, infosec.exchange, also at Lurg, L-E-R-G.
And you can find me. I've all but abandoned X. I can't anymore. But I spend all my time now on the Fediverse. It's Jerry at infosec.exchange. So look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.